Okay, so this is a follow-up video for my Team Losi 22.4 as far as the running experience goes. So after I did the initial review, that was after my first day of racing, and then that was a few days ago actually, and I just got back from my second day of racing with this car, and I made a few changes to it, very minor changes, to try to get it more to my liking. So I'm going to tell you about that and a little bit more about how the car is wearing in and all that stuff. So the one thing that I changed was the front springs. The stock springs are Losi Silver, which is a 3.2 pound spring rate. I went to the Losi Blue front springs, which is a 3.8 spring rate. So a little stiffer. I didn't change the oil or anything, just stiffened up the springs and reset the preload to get back to the same ride height. This helps out a lot with the front dive because with the stock springs, the car was diving a whole lot on heavy braking going into corners, and that tended to make the car actually want to push on corner entry when the car dives that aggressively. So I stiffened up the front to try to mitigate that. The other thing I did at the front was to try a different compound tire. So I commented on the initial review that when I ran M3 front suburbs after about a pack of running, 2 qualifiers, and 1 main, they were completely blown out. They were, almost completely bald. So I tried to go to Proline X2 compound scrubs. The X2 compound is meant for really high traction surfaces. I think it's meant for like sugar-coated tracks or something. But it's basically a harder compound, something more like the MC compound, like a clay compound. And of course, with a harder compound, you're going to lose a little bit of front grip. But I figure the 22.4 has so much steering anyway, even without the clicker, with full-time 4-wheel drive, plenty of steering, that I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of front grip to get more tread life. And this is after, say, about a pack and a half of practice, plus 2 qualifiers and a main. So about the same amount of runtime on the same track, which had roughly the same surface quality on both days. And as you can see, the tread is still there. I mean, there's still some aggressive wear, especially on the outside tire, because the outside gets a lot of load on the high-speed sweeper. If you go look at my racing videos, it's a high-speed left-hand sweeper, so it's loading up this tire. And there's also a tight hairpin at the end where I need a lot of grip as well. So if I rotate these two and race again next weekend, I suspect they'll be bald by the end of the race day then. So basically, with an X2 compound, you can get about 2 days of racing instead of 1 with like an M3 or an M4 compound. My guess is that I'm just going to have to get used to running slicks up front for club racing and save my good tires for like a trophy race, because this is really aggressive front tire wear. I've never had this kind of front tread wear or front tread life with my B44. The B44 is a lot better on tires than this car, especially at the front. The rear is perfectly fine. These are blue barcodes. I mounted them today and ran them today. I was running M3 suburbs a few days ago, and they're just fine. I just wanted to try these out. And they wear similarly, the blue barcodes in the M3 suburbs. And they had plenty of grip, so it's not like I was lacking in rear grip. But, despite having plenty of grip, the tread wear was also very good. So it's really just the front tires that wear out pretty aggressively. Let's see. I think that may have something to do with the slipper clutch. So on, generally speaking, as far as I understand, at least on like the X-Ray chassis and on the B44, when you set the slipper, it has a tendency to send more power to the front wheels than the rear wheels, especially if the slipper is set a little bit loose, because what happens is the spring, the way I can deduce it, or the way I figure, is that the spring is on the front side of the drivetrain. If you look on a B44 or an X-Ray XB4, the spring is towards the front. And my guess is that when you tighten or loosen the slipper clutch on those systems, the most tension you're going to have is on the front side slipper pad between the plate and the spur gear there, and then the rear of the spur gear might not see as much tension. So I would expect the rear slipper pad to sort of slip more than the front. But on the 22.4, it's kind of the opposite. The spring is actually on the side of the spur gear that drives the rear, not the front. But it may be for some other reason that it's still sending more power to the front wheels than the rear wheels, and that's also why these are wearing out so much. Now, I am running my slipper clutch a little bit on the loose side, so if you go look, Team Losi has a nice YouTube video on how to set the slipper on this chassis, and I set it using exactly that method where you put your arms down to lock the wheels and you blip the throttle and you play around with this to get it to a point where you can hear the slipper clutch slipping. And once I get to that threshold, I back off about another 1/2 to 3/4 of a turn. I still get there's still plenty of grip on the slipper pads, so I still get plenty of power transfer through the drivetrain, but I want to put a little more slip in there to protect the belts and the pulleys and the diffs, because other people are having problems with that, and I think that they're just not setting their slipper very conservatively, I guess. And so they're wearing out their drivetrain. But the price you may end up paying for that is more front tire wear. That's my guess on the front tire wear part. Let's see. The other two things I wanted to point out, I did mention this in the initial review, is the rear hinge pin mount brace here is the most aggressive part of the chassis that's wearing on the underside. So here you have, the occasional scrape or so on, some whatever undulations or scratches you have on the track. But with the stock suspension setup with the yellow springs, which is I think a 2.0 rate, and the 32.5, 32.5 shock oil, the rear does bottom out a fair amount, and you can, it's very apparent with this wear. Now, Team Losi does sell a rear kick plate that mounts from these 4 screws out to the end here, but the only problem with that kick plate is that it does not protect these little sort of ears here, right? These extensions on the rear hinge pin brace, which is fair enough because, that's such a small amount of material. If you were to make a plastic kick plate like that, that part would probably just pop right off or would snap off or wear out. So before I run this car too much, I want to maybe put some chassis protector on here and maybe double up in this regions if I can. Or I have some Kydex. I could just cut out of a Kydex sheet my own little sort of chassis protector for the rear, like my own kick plate, just to protect this piece, because this is an aluminum component for one thing. So if you want to buy a replacement, it's not cheap. And for whatever reason, Team Losi does not, they sell this 3-inch toe in low roll center unit, but they sell it as sort of a kit with what do you call it? The hinge pin brace on the toward the front here. Okay, so there's 3 aluminum parts, and they sell that whole thing as a single parts bag for like $30 from A-Main or Tower or whatever. Any other rear toe block, so like the 2.5 or the 2.0 or whatever, you can get just that unit for around $17 or so. So if you want to replace the stock unit, it's actually almost double the price because you're buying other aluminum parts that will never wear out and you don't really need more of them. I'm not sure why they do that. So make sure you put the appropriate measures in place to protect this. The only problem is if you put in some kind of Kydex sheet or something to protect this here, or the skid plate or whatever, then what that's effectively doing is reducing the total amount of down travel you have on your suspension before some part of the bottom of the chassis slaps the ground. And this can affect your jumping performance. So as it is, you might see in my racing videos that this buggy has a tendency to nosedive off of jumps. And that's because the rear is so soft that on the approach to the jump, the rear bottoms out and it slaps the face of the jump, and then it bounces off, and so the car is going to nosedive. And so you have to stay on the throttle to keep the car level for landings. You know, you can compensate. That's not a big issue, but one of the problems is it affects the wear here. And if you have some kind of a kick plate down there, all that really means is that the rear is going to bottom out sooner. So if you're willing to tolerate that and compensate with you know, your driving behavior as the car is nosediving in the air, then okay, that's fine. Otherwise, you know, you may have to stiffen up the rear springs, put in thicker oil, maybe increase the pack by using smaller hole pistons or whatever, but then you're fiddling with the rear suspension setup. And with the exception of the wear that's taking place here, I think the stock rear suspension setup is not bad. It's pretty good. If you stiffened up the rear, you would end up with more steering, and this car already has plenty of steering. So you may end up probably making things on the whole worse by stiffening up the rear. So that is an issue. I'll have to figure out how to get around that. Again, maybe just some kind of extra, you know, chassis protector film or Kydex or whatever. Let's see. So I think that's it for now. I did put my B44 back together and I took it out for some practice runs. The last time I ran it, it kind of, the gears kind of stripped, but it was nice to compare that to this on the same day on the same track. And it actually, the B44 felt pretty good. Every time I try to get rid of it, you know, by getting a new chassis like this, I take it out for a drive and all of a sudden it actually feels pretty nice to drive. So what I can say is between the two, and again, this is a B44.0, not any of the newer ones. With the setup I have, the rear is definitely more locked in than on the 22.4. So on that wide sweeper, on the current layout that we have, again, go look at my racing videos, you'll see that wide sweeper on the far right end of the track. With this buggy, I have so much steering that I'm kind of blipping the throttle just to sort of get the car around that sweeper without either going too wide because I'm too aggressive on the throttle or piping it on the inside because the car has so much steering. With my B44, with its current setup and the tires I'm using on it, I can sort of get more aggressive on the throttle around that sweeper and sort of be a little bit more confident there. But on other parts of the track, like the really tight corners, it doesn't have quite as much steering as this. So that's kind of the trade-off that you pay there. So overall, I think, you know, this is a really nice buggy. It drives great. I can probably put in more consistently fast lap times with this than my B44 with my current sort of driving style, I guess. But they're both pretty quick. It's just you have to kind of pick your poison as far as what problems you want to deal with. You know, this does have its own demons like the steering rack and the front hinge pin brace and the rear hinge pin brace wearing out and, you know, some of the drivetrain issues, but it's still very nice. If you're looking into buying this, if that's really what you're after with this video, I'd recommend it. I think it's reasonably priced. You know, it's not like a $600 laser or anything that's completely not worth it. It's a pretty good price, and you know, the parts quality is quite good, so definitely worth a try. Okay, so I think that's it for now. Thanks for watching.